Hello, my name is Ron Bono. I'm the chairman of the NENA Historical Committee. Each year we've tried to identify individuals that have been instrumental in either starting NENA from the early years or instrumental in the development of 911 technologies. This year we're really pleased to introduce to you the winner of the second NENA Founders Award, Scott Hovey of Alameda, California.
I live outside it, but yes, Alameda County.
Okay.
I live in Contra Costa.
But actually, Scott, you started your career close to where I live. I live in the Midwest, and you started your career, as I understand it, in Missouri, right?
In public safety, yes. I was hired by St. Louis to run its computer center.
St. Louis City Police? What is it?
Well, they call it St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, but it just serves the city. But it was the first real-time system and served neighboring communities as well.
Okay. Now, originally, 911, we always know it started kind of in Alabama, in the, what was it, the very late 60s. But there were some issues that when you were with St. Louis, you identified that you thought was going to inhibit the deployment nationwide, especially in big cities. Can you just kind of briefly tell the audience like what you determined?
Well, yes, it's known as the overlap problem. The phone company has their own geography, which doesn't always match the municipal borders around metropolitan areas. And as a consequence, when the phone company said you'd have to answer all the calls for a central office area, it would be a mix of towns and not all of your city, and that greatly inhibited 911's development in metropolitan areas.
So, you're really talking about how the calls were routed to the right area, and that overlap caused confusion, how they were going to be routed or something?
Yes, you might have identical named streets and addresses in neighboring cities that were both served by, let's say, the 489 prefix. And if a 911 call was received, my house is on fire at 402 Apple, and there were two, and hung up, and there were an Apple.
2 or 3 or 4.
Right. There were legitimate concerns about this overlap.
Okay, so you'd identified this, and obviously it was troubling to you. So you tried to figure out a solution. And I think that, it's kind of interesting because NENA's always kind of been based on two things. One is problem identification, and the other is solving the problem. So you saw the problem, and then you kind of conceptualized a way to solve that problem, didn't you?
St. Louis had an enormous overlap problem. They had over 100 emergency phone numbers in the front of the directory, and if great expansion in the suburbs, you really didn't know what town you were in as you were driving on in. And I had worked in the police department. We set up a geographic information system for our own needs.
And this is in what year?
This was in late 1968.
So the GIS, I thought, was kind of a recent development, and really it hasn't been a recent development.
No, the St. Louis Police may have been the first to have developed a geographic-based file.
Well, coming from Chicago, where the Cubs play, and then St. Louis Cardinals, we don't want to give any credit to anything that happened in St. Louis.
Well, Chicago's fortunate, and all the streets are laid out more or less on a regular grid. But in St. Louis, which is football-shaped, you'd have some streets that started in the north at the river and would swing around to the west, head south, and then come back to the river.
Okay.
And so we had to set up our own geographic base.
Right, so you look at the GIS and you know the problem, so then you're conceptualizing like a vision of how to solve that, right?
Well, I just knew the computer's ability to resolve such problems because we had a geographic base file.
Okay.
And when I first saw the overlap problem on a map and shook my head and walking back to my office, I had the brainstorm. If the phone company knew where to send the bill when you made a long distance call, obviously they had that number for billing purposes, and they could use that with an electronic switch and a simple disk file as to where that number was located and could route it.
Okay, and you call this, you had a term you used for to actually kind of define the idea. What would you call it?
Well, I wrote a paper and I called it Automated 911.
Okay, automated
And it
911.
included not only selective routing, but almost an instant later, if they're using the number for routing purposes, they could send it along for the benefit of the dispatchers, which would be a great breakthrough. And then it took another full half minute to say yes, and they could retrieve it from another computer, the actual address where the phone went.
So really, I mean, we're really talking about, you really kind of thought about what we know as enhanced 911, of selective routing, some kind of an alley record coming back.
All of those elements.
Okay, all those elements is kind of,
Right,
kind of what you thought about.
yes.
All right, so you think about it, it's in St. Louis. Obviously, now we're talking about in the early 70s when 911's not very prevalent across the U.S. So I know that you and I talked before, and you said that there was reluctance from some of the major phone companies to try selective routing. So it was a challenge. And well, my understanding is that you kind of presented it in a lot of forums, and finally, the federal government thought it was at least worth seeing if there's a proof of concept that would this actually work in a real environment, and they asked you to head up a project. Is that right?
Well, not quite that, but very close. I pushed with the phone company, and I pushed with the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, and I was even an engineer supervisor after the president of Southwestern Bell said, well, I don't think it's feasible, and maybe 10, 15 years. Took me, and I had a chance to explain it to AT&T's 911 committee. And they didn't want anything to do with computers. They were under a consent decree, and they could hardly use
All
it.
right, but besides that, I mean, let's go to the meat and potatoes. Eventually, after all this, talking, they did get funded a proof of concept project, right?
Right. They agreed to have a national trial and a proof of concept.
And where was this going to be at?
And, well, they reluctantly told me that it was not going to be St. Louis, which was very disappointing, but they were going to try it out in Alameda County, California, and we could get it after the trial. And they said, well, and I said, how's the trial coming? And said, well, they want to study it locally because they've been burnt by BART, which have been exceeded.
Rapid transit.
Right, and so they want to study it, and how's the study coming? Well, they're looking around for somebody to run the study. And without even checking with my wife, I said, I'll run their bloody study. And they said, you'd consider it? And I said, yes, and adios to the St. Louis Police Department, and it's computer centered. And
So you're real hit with your wife when you come home and say, guess what? We're moving to California.
Essentially, I said the same thing when we were living in Massachusetts. I said, hey, we're going to run the first computer system for police in the nation in St. Louis. Oh,
Okay.
shade.
So anyway, so you move out to Alameda, you do the proof of concept, it's a trial period, and actually the proof of concept works exactly like you thought it's going to work.
Yes, yes. The proof of concept was also to develop the costs. And about 2/3 of the way through the trial, the phone company realized that costs really weren't going to be an issue, and they were no longer interested in developing what the actual costs were. Miami and Dade County, who had been trying to get 911s since '68, asked me down. I explained what we were going to do, and they approached the phone company. And they said, we want the sort of system that's being implemented in Alameda County. And they said, well, when the trial's done, we'll make you an offer. They said, you weren't listening. We want the sort of system that is being constructed in Alameda County, regardless of cost. And at that point, the phone company became much more secretive as to what their actual costs were.
Okay. But anyway, so, I mean, basically, you thought of it, you tested it, you proved it, it became something that within a period of time, the phone companies embraced, public safety embraced, and frankly, it changed the way 911 was forever. I mean, because Enhanced 911, when I came in, we had basic, and we were excited to go to Enhanced, and never understood, and I never understood, I've been in 911 a long time, that you existed. So one of the things the historical committee's been trying to do is identify those pioneers that have made significant contributions to 911, not only operationally and technically, but in every aspect. And we are so happy to recognize your contributions after all these years. I know it kind of took a while for us to reach back and find you, but we're so happy that we found you and that we got to give you the recognition you deserve.
And Ron, as the resident historian archaeologist, I'm delighted that you were able to unearth both Roger Renke and myself in time to be publicly recognized, and in my case, in front of part of my family.
We're so happy you were here, and we're happy it worked out.
It was the first, this has been the first public recognition, and I thank you very much, and NENA for its many courtesies.
Well, let me just explain to our audience, not only are we recognizing Scott's accomplishments at the national conference, but obviously we're doing this video. We're going to do an article for the new NENA magazine, The Call. But also, Roger, I'm not Roger, Scott, you said Roger, you got me on Roger now. Scott, we also have a historical collection that's being cataloged and held by Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Illinois. And they call the historical data that we have, and they keep it in perpetuity, so that this story will be available on the website. And for other people that wonder, how did selective writing start? How did Enhanced 911 develop? So it's not only just for the audience that was here, the people that heard it here, or the people that go on the website or in, on the magazine. It's also people that later on do research and want to know how the progression of 911 happened. So I want to let you know that it's going to be pretty well available who you are and what you did for 911. We want to thank you for that.
Well, Western Illinois will benefit.
Northern Illinois.
Northern Illinois.
Western Illinois is another school we play football against, but it's Northern Illinois.
Well, they'll benefit by a characteristic of my being a pack rat, in that I have hung on to many documents in the public safety as well as in the 911 area.
I'll be interested in looking at those. But anyway, thanks for coming.
Hey,
and
thanks
for sitting down with me for a few
arranging it.
minutes. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye-bye.